I stood there in court trying not to cry as my ex-husband's lawyer tore me apart in front of the judge. "She's broke. She can't even afford a home or decent food and clothes for the kids," she said with a smirk. "Why should she get them?" I clenched my jaw and stayed quiet. I could feel my hands shaking. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart. The judge nodded slowly, as if he agreed. That moment felt like the air was being sucked out of my chest. All I could think about were my children, Luca and Aria. What would happen if they were taken from me and handed over to a man who only cared about control and appearances? I couldn't afford a lawyer like his. I couldn't afford anything, really. I was barely holding on. But I was here. I showed up. And I was doing everything I could for my kids. Then, just as I felt myself slipping into that quiet panic where your body is still but your thoughts are screaming, my 7-year-old son stood up. "Mom," he said loud enough for the courtroom to hear, "can I show the judge the letter I found in Dad's safe?" The room froze. Everyone turned. Derek stiffened. His lawyer blinked like she'd just been slapped. Even the judge stopped mid-sentence. I didn't know what letter Luca meant. My heart pounded. He had never said anything about a letter, but I nodded. And as he walked toward the bench with that folded piece of paper in his small hand, everything changed. I wasn't always the kind of woman who sat in court afraid to speak. I used to be confident. I had a job I loved, friends I laughed with, dreams that felt real. But when I married Derek, things changed slowly, and then all at once. He wasn't always cruel. In the beginning, he was charming, generous, and convincing. He told me I didn't need to work. He said I should stay home, raise the kids, and let him handle the money. "You've done enough," he said once. "You deserve rest." I didn't realize what I was giving up when I agreed. My independence, my voice, my safety net. I became invisible in my own life. After our daughter Aria was born, Derek started changing. He was always tired, always critical. Every dollar I spent was questioned. If I bought diapers without checking the sale price first, I got silence for hours. If I mentioned going back to work part-time, he'd remind me I didn't have a recent resume or say, "We don't need your help. We need you to be a good mom." By the time he left, I had nothing. No savings, no lawyer. No one in my corner except my kids. He cut off the joint account and moved in with someone new. He hired a lawyer right away. I couldn't even afford one. I went to the free legal clinic at the county courthouse and stood in line for 2 hours, holding a folder full of receipts and photos of my kids eating boxed macaroni on paper towels because we didn't have clean dishes. Our apartment was small. I worked 2 cleaning jobs under the table just to stay ahead of the rent. We didn't have cable or internet. I used a prepaid phone and hoped it wouldn't run out of minutes if the school needed to call me. I washed my kids' clothes by hand in the bathtub sometimes. The water heater barely worked, so I'd boil water on the stove and mix it in buckets. Luca never complained. Aria would hum little songs while I scrubbed her socks. I didn't tell anyone how bad it got, not even my mother. I was too ashamed. She'd warned me about Derek years ago, said he looked at people like they were transactions. But I was too in love back then to listen. When the court date came, I was terrified. Derek had filed for full custody, claimed I was unfit. He said I was unstable, poor, unable to provide a good life. His lawyer was brutal. They brought spreadsheets and photos of his beautiful home. They wore expensive suits and smiled like everything was already decided. I walked into the courtroom with a borrowed dress, a hand-me-down blazer, and a plastic folder with school records, attendance sheets, and a letter from our landlord confirming I'd never missed a payment. I knew it wasn't enough, but I had to try. For Luca. For Aria. That morning, Luca held my hand as we walked up the courthouse steps. "Is it going to be okay?" he asked. I smiled, but it felt thin. "Yes, baby, it's going to be okay." But I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure of anything. All I knew was that I loved my kids. I knew what it was like to go without and still put them first. I knew what it felt like to cry quietly in the bathroom after bedtime so they wouldn't see. I knew how hard I worked to make their little world feel safe when everything around us was shaking. Inside the courtroom, I sat straight and still. I watched Derek avoid eye contact. I listened as his lawyer listed off everything I didn't have: money, stable housing, reliable transportation. She said, Her son wears secondhand shoes with holes. Her daughter's teacher says she sometimes skips breakfast. This isn't neglect. This is poverty. And poverty isn't a crime, but it is a risk. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask, where were you when I was skipping dinner to make sure there was enough cereal left? Where were you when I was selling my wedding ring to buy coats for the winter? But I stayed silent. I had learned that in court, anger doesn't look like strength. It looks like instability. The judge nodded slowly as if every accusation made perfect sense. My heart sank, and just when I felt like I might not make it through the rest of the hearing, I felt that little tug on my sleeve. Luca, my sweet, brave boy. He looked up at me with wide eyes and whispered, "Mom, can I say something to the judge?" The courtroom felt colder the second Derek's lawyer began to speak. Carla Dean walked with the confidence of someone who had done this 100 times and expected to win again. She stood tall, her voice loud and clipped, as she laid out her version of my life, one stripped of truth, one meant to humiliate. She has no stable employment. She receives inconsistent financial assistance. Her apartment is temporary housing. The children deserve better than a mother who can barely feed them. I didn't look at Derek. I didn't need to. I could already picture his face. Blank. Relaxed. Watching this unfold like he had nothing to do with it. As if my financial ruin wasn't carefully orchestrated by him. He was the one who drained our joint account days before leaving. He was the one who refused to help with bills unless it made him look good in front of his parents. But none of that mattered in that room. The only thing the judge had in front of him were the spreadsheets and photos from Derek's side, pictures of his pristine house, the fully stocked fridge, the private school brochures. Carla flipped through her documents with a quiet rhythm, pulling out my bank statements. She held them up like they were dirty laundry. Your Honor, as you can see, my client provides a secure, consistent environment. The children have their own rooms, regular meals, a nanny. Meanwhile, Ms. Moreau has no documented income, no verified employer. She's behind on utilities and was issued a warning for late rent in February. This is not a safe or stable situation for two young children. I felt my face flush. She didn't mention the fact that I had picked up every job I could, often cleaning houses for cash because formal work wasn't an option with 2 kids and no childcare. She didn't mention that the rent notice was resolved within days, or that I'd sold everything valuable I had to keep food in the fridge. The judge didn't speak right away. He leaned back, looking down at the papers like they confirmed what he already believed, that I was trying. But trying wasn't enough. I wanted to defend myself, to explain everything, but I also knew how that would look. I had been warned not to interrupt, not to sound defensive, not to cry too much or appear too cold. So I sat there, silent, embarrassed, burning with shame and frustration. My fingers dug into the edge of my seat. I kept my eyes on the kids sitting quietly beside me. Arya was drawing on a piece of scratch paper with a dull crayon. Luca was watching Derek with narrowed eyes. Then Carla said the sentence that cut deeper than any insult she had thrown so far. Why should she get the children if she can't even afford to care for them? It echoed in my mind. Why should I get them? I held back the tears that were pressing behind my eyes. I knew my reality wasn't impressive on paper. I didn't have new clothes for them. I couldn't afford fancy lunches or ballet classes. But I was there every night. I was the one who brushed their hair, checked for monsters under their beds, and stayed up late hand-sewing patches into their jackets because I couldn't afford new ones. None of that mattered to the court. Only numbers did. Numbers I didn't have. The judge looked at me, his eyes heavy with doubt. He opened his mouth as if he was about to speak when I felt it, that small tug on my arm again. Luca. He whispered, "Mom, can I show the judge the letter I found in Dad's safe?" At first, I didn't understand. What letter? I stared at him, confused, until he pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket and held it up. My stomach turned. I didn't know what it was, but something in Derek's posture shifted. He sat up straighter. Carla's eyes locked on the paper. "Luca, what is that?" I asked softly. He didn't answer me. He looked at the judge. "Can I give this to you?" he asked. The judge looked surprised but nodded. "Bring it here." Luca stepped forward, small and steady, walked past the row of polished suits and wide eyes, and handed the letter to the judge with both hands. The room fell into a strange, heavy silence. I could see Derek start to sweat. Carla turned to him, whispering something quickly, her confidence faltering for the first time. The judge unfolded the paper. I watched his eyes move across the words. His expression changed slowly. Confusion, then realization, then something sharper. He looked up, directly at Derek. "Mr. Moreau," he said, "would you like to explain this?" The moment the judge spoke those words, the temperature in the courtroom seemed to shift. Derek's eyes widened. He opened his mouth but said nothing. Carla leaned toward him quickly, whispering again, but this time her voice carried a thread of urgency. Whatever was written on that piece of paper, it had shaken something loose. I leaned forward, my heart hammering, trying to read the judge's face. He held the letter in both hands and looked down at it again, his brow furrowed. Then he read it aloud. To Derek Moreau, from L. Becker, CPA. Subject, Strategic Financial Shielding, Divorce Prep. Then he paused, glancing at the courtroom, then back at Derek. "This is a financial strategy letter, dated 3 months before your divorce was filed. It details instructions for opening offshore accounts, transferring assets to shell LLCs, and minimizing reported income in order to influence custody and support proceedings. It includes the line, quote, 'Keep primary custody if possible, but at minimum ensure she has little ground for legal appeal by appearing financially stable and morally sound.'" He stopped reading. The silence in the courtroom wasn't just quiet, it was suffocating. Every eye was now on Derek. Even Carla looked stunned. She turned her head slowly toward him, whispering something that sounded like, "Is this real?" I didn't move. I couldn't. I was frozen between disbelief and a kind of quiet rage that had no outlet. I had suspected things. I knew Derek was strategic, cold when it came to money, and ruthless when it came to getting what he wanted. But to see it in writing, to hear a judge read it out loud in front of my children, was something I never imagined. The judge lowered the letter and placed it neatly on the bench in front of him. Then he looked back at Derek and said, "You were intentionally misleading this court. You've attempted to manipulate the outcome of these proceedings through financial deception. This letter is a direct attempt to use wealth and calculated dishonesty to deny your children access to their mother." Derek stood up abruptly. "That letter is old. It wasn't used. It's not even—" "Sit down, Mr. Moreau," the judge snapped. The authority in his voice startled everyone. Aria looked up from her drawing and reached for my hand. I wrapped my arm around her without looking away from the judge. He turned his attention back to me. "Miss Moreau, were you aware of this letter before today?" "No, Your Honor," I said. "This is the first time I've seen or heard of it." "And your son found it?" I nodded, my throat tightening. "Yes. He never mentioned it until now." Luca looked up at me then. "I thought it might help. I found it when I was looking for my tablet at Dad's house. I didn't want to get anyone in trouble, but I didn't want us to lose." The judge stared at him for a long moment. Then something softened in his expression. "You did the right thing, young man," he said. He turned back to Carla Dean. "I will be reviewing this document in full and pausing this hearing for a formal inquiry into Mr. Moreau's financial conduct. In the meantime, primary custody will remain with Ms. Moreau, with temporary suspension of the defendant's parenting time until this matter is resolved." The words sank in, slowly. I heard them, but my body didn't react at first. It was like my brain needed a moment to make sure I hadn't imagined them. When they finally registered, I felt my knees tremble. I sat down hard, pulling both of my kids into my arms. Carla Dean stood silent, lips pressed together, arms folded tightly. She didn't argue. She couldn't. The damage was done. Derek didn't say another word. After the judge left the bench, the bailiff dismissed the court. I stayed seated, arms wrapped around my children like they were the only thing anchoring me to the ground. Luca leaned into me and whispered, "Did I mess up?" "No, baby," I said. "You saved us." He nodded once and didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. I finally understood what kind of strength it takes for a child to carry something like that. And I realized something else. The fight wasn't over. But for the first time in a long time, it felt like the truth had a real chance. I walked out of the courtroom that day holding my kids' hands, barely feeling the ground beneath my feet. My legs were moving, but my mind was somewhere else. I kept replaying the judge's words in my head, trying to believe them. He had stopped the hearing. He had suspended Derek's parenting time. He had believed me, or at least he had finally seen the truth for himself. Outside, the air was cold. Luca let go of my hand to zip up Arya's coat. I watched him, feeling a rush of gratitude that I didn't have words for yet. How do you thank a child for something like that? For standing up and doing what no adult in that courtroom had the courage to do? A few days later, the court ordered a formal investigation into Derek's financial activity. I met with a court-appointed investigator, a woman named Ms. Trent, who listened carefully, took notes, and never once looked at me like I was less than. She reviewed the letter, asked questions about our finances during the marriage, and requested permission to pull all relevant tax records and asset disclosures from both sides. I agreed without hesitation. I had nothing to hide. Derek, on the other hand, did. Within a week, his house of cards started to fall. The investigator uncovered multiple accounts registered to shell companies in Nevada and Delaware. She found wire transfers to overseas banks, cash transactions that were never disclosed, and tax inconsistencies that made it clear he had been hiding income for years. Every time I received an update, I felt something slowly rebuilding inside me. Trust in my own memory, confidence in my instincts, and belief that maybe, just maybe, justice could exist. For so long, I had been made to feel like I was imagining things. Derek had convinced everyone, including parts of me, that I was weak, paranoid, and incapable. But now, the facts were proving otherwise. The final hearing came faster than I expected. When I walked into the courtroom again, this time with legal representation provided by a domestic support advocacy group, I stood taller. I wasn't wearing borrowed clothes. I had found part-time work cleaning offices and had saved enough for a modest black dress and sturdy heels. Small things, but they felt like armor. Derek looked different, too. The confidence was gone. His new lawyer spoke in short, tight sentences. There were no smug glances, no fake smiles. The courtroom had shifted. The judge entered and began the session with a statement. This court has reviewed the financial investigation into Mr. Moreau and finds substantial evidence of willful non-disclosure, asset concealment, and manipulation of income to gain an advantage in these proceedings. This behavior directly contradicts the best interests of the children involved. He paused and looked down at me. Ms. Moreau, in light of these findings and your demonstrated commitment to your children's well-being under difficult circumstances, this court grants you full physical and legal custody of Luca and Arya. Mr. Moreau is ordered to pay backdated child support and will be subject to monitored visitation pending further review. I didn't cry right away. I think part of me was still bracing for the moment to be taken away, for someone to say there was a mistake or a change, but no one spoke. The judge signed the order. The gavel fell. It was real. Arya squealed quietly and hugged my waist. Luca squeezed my hand. He didn't smile, but his eyes were shining, steady and sure. That night, we had pancakes for dinner and danced to music on the radio. Nothing fancy, just us in our tiny kitchen, laughing until the sound filled every corner of the apartment. I sat on the floor afterward, holding them both on my lap. Arya was singing. Luca was drawing something on a notepad. When I looked down, I saw what he had written. A picture of a house with 3 stick figures. Above it, he'd written, "Home is where Mom is." That letter he found was more than just a piece of evidence. It was a lifeline, a doorway out of fear and into something that finally felt like peace. He could have hidden it, thrown it away, ignored it. But he didn't. Because even at 7 years old, my son knew right from wrong. And in a courtroom full of adults, he was the one brave enough to tell the truth. It's been 6 months since that day in court, but I still think about it often. Not just the moment the judge ruled in my favor, or the look on Derek's face, but the quiet strength it took to get there. The kind of strength that doesn't come from power or money, but from love. The kind that keeps going when everything else is gone. After the ruling, life didn't become perfect. I still worked long hours. I still budgeted every grocery trip down to the last dollar. I still picked up secondhand clothes and clipped coupons and said no to things other families might take for granted. But the fear was gone. The constant pressure, the feeling that someone was waiting to take everything away, that was over. Derek made a few attempts to regain control. He filed a motion to reduce his support payments, then tried to question the monitored visitation requirements. But the evidence was strong, and the court stood firm. He showed up to his scheduled visitations 3 times, then stopped trying. I didn't explain it to the kids in too much detail. I only told them what they needed to know. Their dad wasn't ready to be consistent, and they deserved people who showed up and stayed. They stopped asking after a while. Luca still talks about the letter sometimes. One evening, we were sitting on the couch, and he asked, "Was I in trouble for taking it?" I shook my head and looked him in the eye. "No, baby, you were brave. You told the truth when it mattered most." He nodded like he understood and leaned his head on my shoulder. That moment reminded me of how easily children carry burdens we don't even see. He had carried that piece of paper for weeks. He had waited for the right time to speak. He had chosen justice when no one asked him to. I started going to counseling. At first, it felt strange to talk about everything out loud, to hear myself admit just how bad it had been. But healing needs air. The more I spoke, the more I realized how much I had internalized. The shame, the guilt, the lie that being poor meant I was failing my children, that I had to prove my worth by looking okay instead of just being honest about how hard it was. My counselor helped me see something I hadn't before. I wasn't weak for struggling. I was strong for surviving, strong for keeping a roof over our heads, for showing up to court without a lawyer, for putting my children first every single day. One weekend, I found a part-time office job that offered benefits. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. I took it. I bought a laptop so I could take evening classes online and work toward a certification in bookkeeping. It was something I had always been good at, but never believed I could turn into a real career. The kids started doing better, too. Aria made a new best friend at her preschool, and her teacher said she'd become more talkative and confident. Luca joined the school's art club and had one of his drawings put up in the hallway. He chose a picture of a tree with roots, thick and deep. Underneath it, he wrote one word: growing. That's what we're doing now, growing. It doesn't always feel fast or easy, but it's steady. Every week we move a little further from fear and a little closer to peace. Sometimes people ask me how I stayed so calm in court, how I didn't fall apart. The truth is, I almost did. But when you're a mother and your babies are on the line, you find a way to keep breathing, to keep standing. Not because it's easy, but because giving up was never an option. This story started in a courtroom, with me being accused of being too poor to be a good mother. It ended with the truth being spoken by the smallest voice in the room, a child who knew what love looked like and wasn't afraid to prove it. We didn't win because we had power or money or perfect appearances. We won because we had honesty, because we stayed kind, and because even when the odds were against us, we refused to break. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: justice doesn't always come easy, but it can still come. And sometimes, when it does, it arrives in the form of a folded letter in a little boy's hand, held with quiet courage, offered with love. That's the day everything changed, not just in court, not just legally, but in my heart. That was the day I stopped surviving and started living again. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the quiet strength it takes to keep going when everything is against you, then please take a moment to like this video. Share it with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone. Leave a comment. Whether you're a parent, a survivor, or someone who just believes in truth and justice, your voice matters here. I read every single one. And if you want more real stories about resilience, love, and what it means to fight for what matters most, subscribe to the channel. We're building a community here, one that sees people, not just their struggles. Thank you for being part of it. I will never forget the sound of the wrapping paper tearing. It was the only thing anyone could hear. No music, no laughter, just that quiet crinkle as my daughter, Kaya, carefully unwrapped her gift, her tiny fingers tugging at the corners like it was the most precious thing in the world. And for a second, she actually smiled, That soft, hopeful kind of smile kids get when they think magic might still be real. But when she opened the box, her whole face shifted. Confusion first, then a flicker of something deeper. Hurt, maybe. Her little shoulders stiffened and she glanced at me. The box was empty. I saw it before she even said a word. Just a plain cardboard bottom. No tissue paper, no toy, not even a note. Just nothing. I blinked, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was it a mistake? Did something fall out? Maybe someone forgot to pack it? But before I could open my mouth, I heard him, my father, Frank. He let out this sharp laugh, short and cold like a bark in winter. He sat back in his armchair, folded his arms, and said, "Kids like her shouldn't expect anything. World's got enough leeches already." My heart dropped. Kaya froze. Her hands were still in the box, like maybe she just hadn't seen the gift yet, like maybe it was hiding under the flaps or tucked in the corner. But there was nothing. I felt the heat rush up my chest. My hands trembled where they rested on my lap. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words caught in my throat like splinters. Then Sandra, my sister, snorted and muttered, "She's just like her mother, always expecting handouts. Worthless." My jaw clenched. I could feel the muscles in my face tightening, the burn behind my eyes threatening to spill over. I forced myself to look at Kaya. She wasn't crying, not yet. But her lips were pressed tight, and her chin was trembling the way it does right before it breaks. Her eyes, those big soft eyes, were filling with tears she was too proud to let fall. She looked at me again, not asking for help, just checking if she should pretend it didn't hurt. And in that moment, I hated myself. I hated that I'd brought her here, that I'd hoped, maybe stupidly, for a normal Christmas, that I thought my father could be different, that I wanted them to see the beautiful, kind, creative girl Kaya was and love her like I did. But they didn't see her. To them, she was just an extension of me, a reminder of my divorce, my failure, the mess I'd made of my life according to them. The room was dead silent except for the soft hum of the heater and the ticking of the grandfather clock behind Frank's chair. Each second sounded louder than the last, like it was counting down to a moment I wasn't ready for. Kaya looked down at the empty box again. Her fingers brushed the edge, then slowly she folded the flaps shut. Her hands were shaking now, and then she whispered something. "I got you a gift too, Grandpa." Everyone turned. Frank looked up, that smug grin still on his face. "Oh yeah," he said, half laughing. "This'll be good." But Kaya didn't back down. She reached into the pocket of her coat and pulled out a small piece of paper, folded with such care it made my chest ache. She took a step forward and held it out to him with both hands, and right then I knew this moment wasn't over. Something was coming, something none of us were ready for. I hadn't been home for Christmas in over 2 years, not since the divorce, not since the shame, not since everything I'd been trying to hold together finally cracked wide open. Kaya. She wanted to see them. She asked me 3 weeks before Christmas, "Mom, do I have a grandpa?" That was her way of asking why we were always alone during the holidays, why we didn't have matching pajamas or giant trees or cousins to run around with. So I said yes, and when she asked if we could visit him this year, I said yes again, against my better judgment. I don't know what I expected. Maybe I thought time would have softened them. Maybe I believed just for a moment that when they saw Kaya, when they really looked at her, they'd feel something. Warmth, regret, love, anything. Instead, the minute we pulled into the driveway, I felt that old weight settle back onto my shoulders, that invisible tension that coils around your ribs like barbed wire when you're trying to smile for people who don't really want you there. Their house hadn't changed, still cold, still perfect, still spotless, in that way that feels less like home and more like a museum. My mother greeted us with that plastic politeness she'd mastered over the years. A quick hug for me, a soft pat on the head for Kaya. Her eyes lingered too long on the scuff marks on Kaya's boots. I saw it, how she took her in like an item on a shelf, deciding whether or not she belonged. Sandra barely looked up from her phone when we walked in. She offered Kaya a half-hearted "hey," then went right back to scrolling. I could already feel my stomach tightening. And then there was Frank, my father. He was in his usual chair by the fireplace, whiskey glass in one hand, TV remote in the other. Didn't even stand up, just gave a nod and muttered, "Didn't think you'd actually show up." That was his way of saying hello. Kaya gave him a shy wave, her mittened fingers poking through the wool. "Hi, Grandpa," she said softly, like she was testing the word out loud for the first time. He grunted. I don't know why I still hoped for more. Maybe because Kaya was trying so hard. She'd made little drawings for everyone, carefully colored, folded, and tucked into envelopes with their names on the front. She even asked me how to spell "to my Aunt Sandra" because she wanted it to be perfect. She worked on them every night for a week. I wanted this to be special for her. I wanted her to feel like she had a family, even if they were far from perfect. I scraped together what I could from tips and extra shifts just to buy her one nice outfit, a little gift to open, and enough gas to get us there. That morning, as I tied her scarf, she looked up at me and said, "Do you think they'll like my drawings?" And I said, "Sweetheart, they're going to love them." But in the pit of my stomach, I already knew the truth. I was bringing her into a house where kindness was currency they never gave out for free, where smiles were measured and love had conditions. Still, I tried. I told myself this was about Kaya, not me, that I could keep my chin up, play nice, pretend for one day that everything was okay. But as I watched her heart quietly break in front of them over something as cruel as an empty gift box, I realized they hadn't changed, and I wasn't sure they ever would. Kaya handed out her little envelopes like they were treasures. She moved through the room so gently, like she was afraid to disturb anything. Each envelope had a name on the front, written in her careful, blocky handwriting. She gave one to my mother first, then Sandra, then even my brother Matt, who'd barely spoken a word since we walked in. When she got to Frank, she paused for just a second, long enough that I held my breath. But she smiled, lifted the envelope, and said, "Merry Christmas, Grandpa." He didn't look up from the television, just held out a hand like she was delivering the mail, not offering a piece of herself. She moved back to the couch and sat beside me. Her face was still lit up, hopeful. She had no idea how cold the room had gotten. Then Frank picked up a large box from beneath the tree. It was wrapped in silver paper, topped with a red bow, almost too neatly. He held it out toward Kaya with a grunt. Her eyes widened. "For me?" He shrugged. "Says your name, doesn't it?" She looked at me first, like she needed permission. I nodded, even though something in my gut twisted. She scooted to the floor and pulled the box into her lap. Her small hands ran over the paper like it was sacred. I watched her savor every moment, the untaping of each edge, the careful unfolding. She wanted to remember it. Then the lid came off. She peered inside, and I saw it happen. The exact second she realized it was empty. Her face didn't crumple, not right away. Instead, her eyebrows pulled together in confusion. She reached in, as if something might be stuck at the bottom. She looked up at me, uncertain. There was nothing in the box. Nothing. Frank laughed, loudly this time. "What, you were expecting something real?" he scoffed, leaning back. "World doesn't give you gifts for just showing up, kid." Kaya blinked. Her hands froze. I couldn't move. Then Sandra, always waiting for a moment to cut deeper, chimed in from her corner of the couch. "Well, she is just like her mom, always expecting people to hand her things. It's no surprise." I felt it in my chest like a punch. I turned to her. "Sandra, don't." She raised a brow, smirking. "What? It's true." Kaya was silent now. The box still rested in her lap, flaps wide open, exposing the nothing inside. The room had turned on her, and I saw her realize it. I hated them. I hated them for making her feel small, for making her question her worth, for laughing like it was all a joke. I reached for her, but she didn't move. She just kept staring at the box like it might somehow fill itself if she waited long enough. Inside, I was screaming. Say something. Stand up, defend her. But I didn't want to make a scene, not in front of her. That's the thing about being in families like this. You learn to freeze when things get cruel. You learn to smile through clenched teeth. And I'd spent so many years doing just that, It almost felt normal, but it wasn't normal. Kaya was only 7. She didn't know how to put on a mask yet. She didn't know how to swallow that kind of pain. Then she looked up at Frank. Her voice was quiet, barely more than a whisper, but it cut through the room like a bell. "It's okay," she said. "I got you a gift too, Grandpa." And just like that, the whole room shifted. No one spoke, no one laughed. She reached into her coat pocket, and I realized something was about to happen that none of them would forget. I stared at her completely still as Kaya reached into her coat pocket. The room had gone silent. So quiet I could hear the faint creak of the old floorboard under the Christmas tree with every slight movement. My own breath felt too loud in my chest. She pulled out a folded piece of paper. It looked small in her hands, fragile even, like something that could be crumpled and dismissed without a second thought. But she held it like it mattered, like it meant something. I whispered, "Kaya, maybe not now." She turned to me, and there was something in her eyes I didn't recognize. Not sadness, not hurt, but calm, steady. She gave a little nod, the kind that said, "I have to do this." Then she turned to Frank. "I made this for you," she said. Frank didn't even lean forward. He just glanced at it with that same bored expression he always wore when someone dared ask him to feel something. "Oh yeah?" he muttered, sipping his drink. "You draw me a snowman or something?" There was sarcasm in his voice, the kind he always used when he wanted to make you feel small without raising it. But Kaya didn't flinch. She walked across the room and held it out to him with both hands. That's when I noticed her fingers were shaking. I knew that feeling. The way your hands betray you when your heart's thudding in your chest, when you're trying to be brave, even though every part of you wants to run. He took it from her like it meant nothing, slid it open with one hand while still holding his glass in the other. Then he looked down and stopped. I couldn't see what was on the paper from where I sat, but I saw his face. It didn't twist in confusion or irritation like I expected. Instead, his eyebrows drew together. He blinked once, then again. His jaw slackened just slightly, like he'd forgotten what he was doing. The entire room seemed to lean in. "What is it?" Sandra asked, impatient. He didn't answer. He just stared. Kaya stood there, hands clasped in front of her now, watching him quietly like she wasn't sure what came next either. I got up and crossed the room, slowly, almost afraid to break the moment. I stepped beside her and gently placed my hand on her back. She didn't look at me. She just kept her eyes on Frank, and he looked older than I'd ever seen him. Not angry, not smug, just still. He folded the paper carefully, deliberately, almost reverently, and placed it on the side table next to his chair. Then he stood up. No one knew what to say. No one moved. He walked out of the room without a word. The sound of his footsteps down the hallway was the only thing we could hear. He didn't slam the door, didn't shout, just left. I looked down at Kaya. Her voice was quiet when she asked, "Did I do something wrong?" I knelt beside her, wrapped my arms around her, and whispered, "No, sweetheart. You did something brave." Sandra muttered something under her breath, but this time, I didn't care. Because I knew, whatever Kaya had drawn, whatever she had written, it got through to him in a way none of us ever could. She didn't fight back with anger. She didn't cry or scream or run. She gave him a gift, one that reminded him he was still human, even if he'd forgotten. And I think, just maybe, that scared him more than anything else. I didn't see my father for the rest of the day. He didn't return to the living room, didn't come back for dinner. Not even when my mother called out that dessert was ready, in that overly sweet tone she used when pretending everything was fine. Kaya didn't mention him again that evening. She played quietly with the ribbon from one of her other small gifts and helped me fold the wrapping paper scraps like it was any other night. But I could tell her mind was somewhere else. Every now and then her eyes would wander toward the hallway where Frank had disappeared, like she was waiting for something. But nothing happened. Not that day. We left early the next morning. I told them we had plans back in the city, but the truth was, I couldn't bear to spend another second pretending. Sandra didn't even get up to say goodbye. My mother handed me a foil-covered plate of leftover ham and told me to drive safe. No mention of what happened. No one asked how Kaya was doing, and that, somehow, hurt even more. The ride home was quiet. Kaya stared out the window, watching snow blur past the trees. I reached over and held her hand at one point. She squeezed back. I didn't bring up the drawing. I didn't want to make her explain something that was clearly so personal. I didn't want to pull apart whatever magic had lived in that moment. But I thought about it the whole drive home. What had she drawn that made my father, the man who once called me too soft for crying at a movie, turn pale and leave the room without a word? I found out 4 days later. It came in a small, unmarked box left on our porch. There was no return address, just Kaya's name written in careful block letters across the top. She opened it slowly, like she wasn't sure if it was safe to hope. Inside was a tiny music box, old-fashioned, wooden, hand-carved edges with little roses painted around the lid. It played Somewhere Over the Rainbow when she turned the crank. And there was a note. It was just one line, handwritten in a shaky, unfamiliar scrawl. To the bravest girl I know. Thank you for remembering her. No signature, but we didn't need one. Kaya clutched the box to her chest like it was made of gold. She didn't say anything at first. She just held it and smiled. I sat down next to her on the floor and finally asked, Kaya, what did you draw for Grandpa? She looked up at me and said, it was a picture of him holding hands with Grandma and me. Her voice was soft. I told him I hope he smiles again one day, because I remember how she made him laugh. My throat tightened. I didn't speak. I couldn't. Because that was it. That was the part of him I'd forgotten even existed. The man who once smiled, once laughed. Before grief hardened him, before the years made him cruel, Kaya saw through all of that and gave him a piece of something he thought he'd lost forever. Not pity, not guilt, hope. She didn't try to fix him. She just reminded him that he used to be someone worth remembering. And in return, he gave her something too. Maybe not love, maybe not forgiveness, but a beginning. And sometimes, that's enough. The music box now sits on Kaya's nightstand. Every night before bed, she winds it up. Not always to listen. Sometimes she just likes to hold it, to feel its weight in her hands, to know it's there. The way a child might clutch a stuffed animal they've outgrown but still can't let go of. She hasn't said much about that day since, but every now and then she'll mention Grandma, someone she never even met, but speaks about like she's still here, like she's someone Kaya knows through the stories I've told and the quiet space she left behind, and maybe she does. Frank never called. He didn't send a follow-up message. No, I'm sorry. No explanations. That's not who he is. Maybe that's not who he'll ever be. But a week after the music box arrived, I got a letter. It wasn't addressed to Kaya. It was for me. It was short, 3 lines written in the same uneven handwriting. I was wrong. About you. She's a good kid. I hope you're doing okay. No name. But I knew. And for reasons I can't quite explain, I cried after reading it. Not because it made everything better, not because it fixed the years of silence or the way he used to look through me like I was a disappointment wearing a name tag, but because for once, it felt like he saw me. And more than that, he saw Kaya. He saw what I've always known, that she's special, that she has this way of peeling back the coldness in a room and showing people their own warmth, even when they don't deserve it. She's not loud. She doesn't demand attention, but she changes things. She changed him. Not completely, but enough. Enough to make a man who'd shut the door on the world open it just a crack. Enough to make someone who believed only in toughness and silence sit down and listen to the music from a little girl's drawing. People ask me sometimes why I went back that Christmas, why I let them near her, why I didn't protect her better. And the truth is, I thought I was. I thought shielding her from their coldness would be enough, that not talking about them, not visiting, not engaging, that it would protect her heart. But Kaya didn't need protection. She needed truth. She needed to meet them, to see the world for what it is, beautiful and cruel, broken and hopeful, all tangled together. And somehow, instead of getting lost in it, she decided to add her own light. She didn't need revenge. She didn't even want an apology. She just wanted to give a gift. And that gift, as simple as it was, did something I couldn't do in 30 years. It opened a door, not wide, not forever, but enough for a note to get through, enough for a song to play in the quiet, enough for a tired old man to remember a part of himself he thought was gone. Kaya reminded me of something that day, too, that sometimes kindness is the most radical act, that a whisper can carry more weight than a scream, and that when we choose love, even when it's hard, even when it's not returned, we create something no one can take away, a moment, a shift, a gift. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, and comment. And maybe give someone in your life the gift of a second chance today. You never know what doors it might open.